Okay, so this is a war story, which I don't know if it's a good or bad one, but it's just something that happened. When we first went down and started working with the Contras, I was actually taken back by the youth of all the soldiers. Now, I was probably 21, 22 at the time. No, maybe I was 23. Yeah, I was. I was 23 at the time. So, I mean, I wasn't old by any standard, but I wasn't young. I wasn't a kid, you know. I knew what I was getting myself into. I was mentally prepared for this. I knew I was going into combat. So that wasn't such a big deal, but I was surprised that a lot of the guys we were working with were 14, 15-year-old kids. They were, I mean, we'd go into combat missions and firefights with kids, you know, and it was explained to me that a lot of the kids that we were fighting with were orphans from the war. So they really didn't have a choice. They could either go to the refugee village where they had no support, no family. Maybe they could find somebody from one of their villages if there was anybody left. Communists were just brutal on the indigenous personnel on the Mosquito Coast. And their choice was to join the military so they could be fed and be taken care of. It was a small price to pay. They'd help free their country and they were able to eat. So being that the army had gotten wiped out pretty bad a year or so before, they were taking young kids. So the rule was from age 10 to 13, then you were able to join the military, the Contra rebel force, and this is on the Mosquito Coast. I don't know what it was like with the FDN over on the West Coast, but this was working with the Missouri Indians on the East Coast. And if you were 10 to 13, you could join the military, but you couldn't go into combat. So that meant that you were relegated to guarding weapon storage areas, some of the villages, some of the training camps and stuff. So you could be a guard, and I guess that was kind of a gift they would give these kids, because I mean, you know, a 10, 11-year-old kid, but these kids were deadly. You didn't want to mess with them. They would shoot you dead in a heartbeat, you know. And the kids that were 14 and older, they were allowed to go into combat. So on this one mission we were doing a lot of movement. We were going in country pretty far to hit our target on this one, and we all had certain places in our line. There was 60 of us that started out, and I was in spot like number 21 or 22 in the line, and I darkened my face up as much as I could because I'm a big, tall, white guy, and there's a bunch of short little indigenous personnel. I stuck out like a sore thumb because the Sandinista army for sure would have wanted to capture, you know, an American that was, you know, cross-border raiding and causing trouble. That was great propaganda for them. If anybody remembers what happened to Eugene Hassenfoss when he was captured, they stuck him in front of the press right away. But so there was this kid that was in front of me, and he was always in front of me because we all had our place in line. And he was about 14 years old, maybe he was 15, but I think he was 14. And he was a gunner, an assistant gunner to the guy in front of him that had an M60. I was carrying an M16 on this mission, and this kid was so laden down with extra ammunition for that machine gun. I don't know how he was walking. Besides all the gear he had just belt after belt in his backpack, and his backpack was so heavy that he fashioned it out of like reeds or something that he twisted together, and it went around his head and to his backpack, so the weight was kind of not bringing him back so much, and he was able to lean forward and get the weight off his kidneys, I guess, or his back or something. But this kid was humping a lot of weight, a lot more than I was, and I was having a hard time. We were doing 15, 20, sometimes I remember one day we did 30 miles in one day on foot. That's a lot of walking with a backpack like that. You know, everybody goes, oh yeah, we had to do a 30-mile march, you know, in training. But try doing that every day for a week, you know. Man, my feet were bleeding so bad it wasn't even funny. But everybody had blisters, everybody's feet were killing them. But, you know, you just keep on going, because what are you going to do otherwise, you know? So you just take care of it and keep going. But I saw this kid, and we had traded some arms. I believe maybe there were 6 or 8 M60s and some other small arms with the fighters on the West Coast with the FDN. And in return, they gave us boots, because it was sorely lacking in boots. Their uniforms were basically the green-colored Dickies that you would find over at what do you call it, over at Target. You know, they get the blue ones and the green-colored ones. Well, they had green ones. That was some of their uniforms. You know, they didn't have formal uniforms. So they got whatever they could get donated. And this, you know, a lot of the guys just had rubber boots. Well, you can't go into combat wearing rubber boots, you know. I mean, they were like the Wellington type, you know, thigh high, not thigh high, but calf high boots. So we finally got him some combat boots. Everyone was happy. Most of them didn't have socks anyways. But this kid's boots were so deteriorated at this point that instead of walking on them, the leather had deteriorated, and he was walking kind of on the side of the sole. His feet were just like flopping down in the middle, and the sole was over here, and he was having a real hard time. And I just went over to him, and as we were, you know, humping along in line, you know, because we were spaced out quite a bit, I just went up to him and I just opened up his pack, and he looked at me, and I just, you know, I couldn't speak his language, so I just, you know, universal told him, hey, hold on a second, and I grabbed a couple belts of ammunition and threw them over my shoulders, you know, kind of cross-braided like you see in the movies and stuff like that, and which, by the way, you have the pointy part facing out so it doesn't stick into your neck. Anyway, so you have the bullets facing away from you. But so I put a couple belts over me, and I think I grabbed another one around my waist, and I stuck one in my pack. So I lightened his load quite a bit, and he was thankful. He said "tanky," which in their language meant thank you. So and a couple of the conchas behind me saw this, I guess, and thought it was a good thing, you know. And because as I was doing, I turned around, and you could tell these guys were kind of like nodding, like, okay, this guy's okay. Because at that point, we hadn't had a lot of experience or combat experience with these guys side by side. We'd done a lot of training and everything, but this was like one of the first missions where we actually went into the combat zone with them. So everybody was kind of looking at each other like, hey, we didn't know if the Contras were worth a darn fighting. They didn't know if we were worth a darn fighting. So at this point, you know, kind of bonded. I guess it was a bonding moment, you know. So we went on with the mission and stuff, and as the mission wound up and we were, I don't know, maybe 4 days from the Honduran border, I was hurting. All right, now it was my turn. My feet were hurting. I was dehydrated. I was hungry. You know, our food supply was getting low, and I was just really dragging. I was dragging hard. I'll admit it. It was rough. You know, but I didn't quit. I kept going and stuff. And I remember this one incline. We were going through an area. It was kind of like savanna grassland because there wasn't a lot of water, but there was a couple trees and stuff like that. So I came up over this knoll, and there was a lot of trees there, or a few trees there. And I came up over this knoll, and it was all I could do to get up over this knoll, man. It was maybe a 30-degree incline, but I was really struggling getting up there with all my pack and stuff, and had a lot of ammo on us still at that point. We got our load lightened earlier because we were shooting a lot later on, but at this point I still had a lot of ammo on me. And by the time I got to the top of that hill, I was just like, oh man, I was exhausted. You know, I had to stop and rest for a minute, get a drink of water, and started moving. And then the two conchas that were behind me in line stopped me this time and took the ammo off me, and they took it and they carried the load for a while. And I was thankful, because you wouldn't think that, you know, 3 or 4 belts of ammunition, you know, the 100-round belts, so that was like 400 rounds of .308 I had hanging around my body. So they took it off me this time, and they gave me a break, and they divided it up amongst themselves. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I looked at them, and they were kind of looking at me like, okay, now it's our turn, you know. But I was thankful that they helped me out. So anyway, so it was just kind of a good bonding moment. But, you know, that's the type of brotherhood that you get with soldiers that, you know, civilians don't understand. You know, either, you know, when it all hits the fan, you're not fighting for God and country and, you know, your ideology or anything like that. You're fighting for the guy that's next to you, the guy that you've been humping through the jungle with, and the savanna grasslands, or the guys that's, you know, been carrying your load and now they're carrying yours. That's what it's all about. It's all bonding and that brotherhood that, man, you just don't understand unless you've been in a war zone with somebody and you've been going through something like that, you know. So when you hear vets talking about, you know, my brother or this and that, you know, I go to the VA to this day, and I'll walk down the hall and I'll see somebody and they'll go, hey brother, what's up? Because they know, you know. So all right, so that's the end of that story. So all right.